Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're joining us from today. I'm excited to welcome you to Financing the Circular Economy Transition, a virtual event being brought to you today in partnership by the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, UNEP FI, Circular Economy Leadership Canada, and Globe Series. Today's session is an official Accelerator Session of the 2021 World Circular Economy Forum, and I want to offer our special thanks to the Government of Canada and the Finnish Innovation Fund CITRA for hosting this year's WCEF event. My name is Peggy Lefort. I'm Resource Efficiency Coordinator for UNEP FI, and I will be co-hosting today's session along with my colleague Elizabeth Schur.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As Peggy mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Schur. I'm Managing Director of Globe Series, and I have the privilege of co-hosting today's event alongside Peggy. I'm thrilled to share that we have over 100 and growing attendees. We had over 600 people register for today's session, and we have individuals joining from all over the world: Canada, the US, the United Kingdom, India, Germany, Italy, South Africa, and Bangladesh. So we're thrilled to have everyone here today. With this in mind, before we begin, I do believe it's important to acknowledge that many of us joining this webinar from Canada are settlers on land that is the traditional, ancestral, and often unceded territory of a diversity of Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Métis, and Innu. And the act of acknowledging the land, for those of you who might not be familiar with this practice, is, and the signed treaties where applicable, is an act of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. It's an expression of respect and gratitude for the land. And this action is to remind us that our places of work, where we live and where we gather, are on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples who have historically resided here and still do today. It's also a recognition that all of us are accountable to these relationships on a daily basis. So I would encourage those of you who've joined the line to take a moment and share in the chat box with your colleagues something about your connection to the land, whether you know the formal land acknowledgement for the place that you live, if you feel a strong particular connection to the place where you're joining from, please feel free to share that. And of course, all languages are welcome. We're also now going to share in the chat with you a wonderful resource called nativeland.ca. And I'd encourage you to check out this resource and learn more about your connection with the land, where you reside, its traditional peoples, and its meanings. I myself am joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, also known as North Vancouver. And thanks to you sharing in the chat where you're joining us from today. Love to see that coming through. Peggy, back to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Before we get things going with our first panel, we'd like to get a sense of where you, the audience, are coming from on the important topic of financing the circular economy. And so in a moment, you'll see a poll appearing on your screen, and we'd encourage you to please answer to the question. Share with us your answer. So the question is, besides funding, what do you think is the primary role of the finance sector in supporting the circular economy transition? Do you think it's identifying new or innovative financing solutions and products, or supporting their clients to identify and implement circular opportunities, or contributing to standardization of frameworks, or contributing to data collection? So now please vote and let us know what you think. And if you think there's an important role that is not captured in the responses here, please feel free to add it in the chat. And in a moment, we'll share the results of the poll on screen for you to see.
Awesome. Thanks for everyone's responses coming in. And yeah, let's share those results. Fantastic. So the top answer, supporting clients to identify and implement circular solutions, but a strong mix across the board. So thanks very much for your responses there. Awesome. Okay, well, without further ado, we want to get into the good stuff. WCEF 2021 Accelerator Sessions are intended to be outcome-oriented events that help drive the action required to enable the transition to a more circular economy. Our session today, of course, focused on discussing real actions we can take to scale up the flow of financing to circular projects, companies, projects, and supply chains. We're going to kick off with a short video providing highlights of the recently released Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI, guide to investor engagement on an issue that's critical to circular economy, plastics packaging. We're going to hear from a panel next, moderated by Peggy, featuring a diversity of perspectives from around the world on how we can scale up circular finance. And then for the second half of the session, I'll be moderating a series of rapid fire one-on-one interviews where we'll dig deeper into specific Canadian circular finance challenges and opportunities with representatives from a range of Canadian financial institutions. Of course, throughout the session, we encourage you to use the chat function. I see you active in there now. That's wonderful. Share your thoughts, engage with other participants, and please pose questions for our speakers. We will have an opportunity to share those with our panelists and interviewees. I'm also going to give you one small to-do. As you're listening to the first set of speakers, I want you to look around your workspace or the room you're in, see if you can find an object that really brings to mind the importance or conjures up the opportunity to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. But don't share it right away, hold on to it, and we're going to come back to that later. So now, Peggy, it's my pleasure to hand things over to you to get things going, and I will see you all a little later.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So as already mentioned, the first panel discussion will have a global perspective. The development of a common direction and a common language through harmonized frameworks and metrics is absolutely essential to scale up the financing of a circular economy. A lot of initiatives are currently deployed and the momentum is strong. However, all this will take time. And so this first panel session will explore how, in the meantime, to scale up the financing of circularity by extending it wider into two directions: within the financial sector to financial institutions which are not yet actively involved in circularity financing, and within enterprises to SMEs. Before I introduce our esteemed global panelists, it's my pleasure to kick things off with a brief video from PRI, Principle for Responsible Investment, highlighting its recently released guides to investor engagement on plastic packaging, focused on a very practical approach to 4 sectors in the plastic packaging value chain. And as the video plays, we'll also share in the chat a link to access these guides.
Welcome to this presentation on a guide to investor engagement on plastic packaging. My name's Rebecca Chapman, and I'm a specialist in environmental issues at the PRI, and it's a pleasure to be able to present to you today as part of this session on financing the circular economy. The PRI works to understand the investment implications of environmental, social and governance issues, and to support signatories in integrating these issues into investment and ownership decisions. In 2018, PRI formed the Plastics Investor Working Group, which now consists of 29 global investors with around 5.9 trillion of assets under management. The group aims to raise investor awareness of the impacts, risks and opportunities surrounding plastic production, waste and pollution, map the materiality of plastic to companies across the plastic value chain, and finally to support signatory understanding and investor action to achieve the responsible production and consumption of plastics. As part of building an understanding of how to address plastic waste and pollution, the group has explored how the circular economy can be applied as a solution to this issue. As a result, PRI has recently published a series of engagement guides focused on plastic packaging. These were developed in collaboration with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Kronos Sustainability, and members of PRI's Plastics Investor Working Group. The guides empower investors to constructively engage with companies in key sectors of the plastic packaging value chain, including chemicals, containers and packaging, fast-moving consumer goods, and waste management. The guidance helps investors ensure a harmonized approach across these 4 sectors in the plastics value chain, and it is also aligned with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's new Plastics Economy Global Commitment, which already unites businesses, governments, and other organisations behind a common vision and set of targets. It's important for investors to address plastic waste and pollution and support the building of a circular economy through their stewardship activities, as failing to do so impacts the environmental systems and ecosystem services, i.e. public goods, that support economic performance, investor returns, and beneficiary interests more broadly. Packaging is one of the largest applications of plastic and drivers of plastic waste. It accounts for around 45% of all plastic resin produced and for around half of plastic waste globally. The transition to a circular economy for plastics, where plastic production is decoupled from fossil fuel use and all plastic packaging is reused, recycled or composted, will require significant changes across a range of industries, including the entire plastics packaging value chain. To expand further on the risks investors and the companies they invest in face across the plastics value chain, firstly, in terms of policy and regulatory risks, many countries are regulating, or in some cases banning, certain plastics. Companies that rely on plastics could also face higher taxation, extended producer responsibility fees, and increased raw material costs in the future. In terms of reputational risks, companies face growing scrutiny and potentially significant reputational damage as consumers become increasingly aware of the impacts of plastic pollution. In terms of climate risks, projections suggest that emissions from plastic could account for 10 to 13% of the Earth's remaining carbon budget by 2050 if plastic production and use grow as currently planned. In terms of wider environmental risks, mismanaged plastic waste contributes to waterway and ocean pollution, which clogs urban infrastructure and degrades natural systems such as the ocean. Finally, microplastics, which have been detected in bottled water and the tissue of fish and other marine life, may have negative health impacts when ingested by humans. These are not yet fully understood, but if determined in the future, may lead to heightened societal concern and health-related restrictions on plastic use. Addressing these risks and transitioning to a circular economy can reduce the negative impacts of plastic packaging, whilst also creating new investment and innovation opportunities, such as new materials, business models, and recycling technologies, and contributing to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, such as SDG 12 and SDG 14. The guides provide a framework for investors to constructively engage with companies in the plastic packaging value chain to determine how they are managing risks and opportunities in relation to plastic packaging, and encourage them to take action by 2025 to eliminate the production and use of problematic or unnecessary plastics, innovate to ensure that all plastics are reusable, recyclable or compostable, and circulate materials to keep plastics in the economy and out of the environment. Some actions are applicable across the plastic packaging value chain, whilst others vary depending on the sector in question. For example, in alignment with the global commitment, all sectors in the guides are expected to collaborate with the wider value chain and report publicly on their annual plastic use or production and progress towards their targets. However, the petrochemical sector is expected to commit to increase its use of recycled plastics, whereas FMCG and containers and packaging companies have a wider range of commitments. They're expected to commit to making their packaging 100% recyclable, reusable and/or compostable, eliminating problematic and unnecessary packaging, in addition to increasing their use of recycled plastic. Investors can use the sector-specific guides to assess actions taken by companies on plastic pollution and encourage them to set ambitious targets and report on progress towards a circular economy for plastics. The 4 guides contain key sector considerations regarding the sector's use of or role in producing plastic packaging, waste and pollution, investor questions to support engagement dialogues in relation to corporate commitments, risk assessment and management, targets and action plans, reporting and progress achieved to date, performance assessment tables to help investors understand company progress against the actions and outcomes required to address plastic waste and pollution and support a more circular economy by 2025. And finally, examples of company best practice in relation to specific elements, for example, supporting the increased use of recycled content. Going forwards, to help scale action to support a circular economy for plastics, PRI will continue to promote the message of the guides to build greater investor awareness and action on plastic packaging waste and pollution. Additionally, PRI will work with the Plastics Working Group to deepen the insights within the guides and explore other areas in more detail. For example, further exploring the links between plastic and other priority ESG issues for investors, such as climate and nature-related goals, to better integrate these agendas. More broadly, PRI is also scoping a new work programme on circularity, which will expand our focus to a wider range of value chains and materials, and where we hope to closely complement the work of UNEP FI. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you to PRI for providing that resource, which is an excellent example of actions that can be taken to make things happen. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first group of speakers to the virtual stage. So we have today with us Jan Rees, Global Sustainability Advisor of the Dutch bank ABN AMRO, and also author of the report published by UNEP FI on financing circularity, demystifying finance for circular economies. Hi, Jan. Marisela Alvarenga, Chief of the Financial Intermediaries Division at IDB Invest, which is part of IDB Group, the Multilateral Development Bank in Latin America and the Caribbean. Hi, Marisela. And Jean-Luc Lavergne, founder and CEO of Lavergne Group in Canada, which is a manufacturer of recycled plastic compounds from post-consumer and post-industrial plastic waste. Hi, Jean-Luc. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. So we're going to explore together what actions can be taken today to scale up the financing of the transition to a circular economy. I suggest we first focus on the financial sector, and more specifically on those financial institutions which have not yet started their journey towards financing circularity or are just starting it. So my question to you, to the three of you, is how can they get started and accelerate this journey? Jan, I suggest we start with you. ABN AMRO has been engaged in financing a circular economy for several years. And so we would love to hear from you what actions have been taken by ABN AMRO and what is important for a financial institution which gets started and wants to accelerate on this topic.
Yes, thanks. And happy to be here. Good evening to you all. I'm with you from Amsterdam, Netherlands, Europe. Actually, the key was making a target. I think in finance, a financial target helps. The first target that was put for 2020 was 1 billion in circular deals. The amount of deals was estimated at 100, so average deal size should be around 10 million euro of credit going to a client active in circular economy business models. And again, for any bank in the world, and I've seen other banks do that besides ABN AMRO, also an Italian bank, they were even more aggressive. They put a 5 billion euro target with a longer time horizon. But it's interesting to see what happens when you put a number to it, right? And for a bank, I would say choose any number. So the number itself doesn't matter whether it's 1 billion or 5 billion. In general, it remains small compared to the amount of linear business that's around that will also give opportunity for banks. But starting this journey and putting a financial target, that's, I think, maybe not the first step, but it's definitely a very conducive step to do the next steps. And the next steps are really capacity building actions. So I'll mention the 4 key capacity building actions that I've seen to be successful at ABN AMRO, but also I've seen them successful at other banks, other European banks mainly that are on my watch list. What I see all of them do well is that they workshop with their clients to understand how to move from linear, what most clients do, to circular business models, right? And then that could go from, I actually supply working clothes or shoes for construction work. So how can I shift from just selling these shoes to, for example, leasing these shoes for the term of the construction activity, and then cleaning them, giving them a second life, and then bringing them actually to a second project. Those are considerations that are uncomfortable at first, but clients kind of have to wrap their head around a new model of engaging that is more circular than the previous one, which is mostly take, make, waste. And so that's one, workshopping with very surprising results, as I shown with a shoe manufacturer, trying to renovate or renew their model of business. Now, building a pipeline of circular deals, that's something very obvious, but it also contains these new business models like product as a service. And circular economy is cross-cutting. So it's agriculture, it's industry, it's electronics, like could be anything. That's not a plug of a brand, but I'm just showing something that's up for recycling one day. I've just bought a speaker, and it's hard to find one that's really up there, that's really circular. I can just offer it for recycling, but I don't know if it's going to be recycled. So, but building a pipeline of circular deals starts those conversations with clients. Like, for example, the company that's with us today, Laverne. That might be a great company to start with. Then capacity building, a group of 80 dedicated relationship managers at ABN AMRO we have, and they are more deeply involved in achieving the financial target of 1 billion, and now the target has been raised to 3.5 billion. So they have to know more about sustainability, sustainable finance. And last but not least, it's raising awareness and online workshops, some sort of certification mechanism for the broader range of employees. We have more than 10,000 employees, so it's not only those 80 that are in the know, the others need to know what actually this strategic option to go for circular economy finance involves. So I keep it to that, and in a nutshell, it's working with clients, it's building a pipeline, it's educating your key employees that are customer facing, and then not forgetting about the broader employee base that also needs to know about what's happening in the company.
Thank you very much. Jan, for this inspiring experience. So yeah, as you said, being ambitious, setting targets, capacity building, dedicated teams, disseminating the message, all this, yes, seems key indeed. So I will now turn to you, Marisela. IDB Invest is also deeply engaged in the financing of circular economy. What would be your thoughts on this first question, and what is the role of multilateral financial institutions to scale up the financing of circular economy?
Thank you, Peggy, and nice to be here. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marisela Alvarenga, and I'm the Division Chief for Financial Institutions at IDB Invest. IDB Invest is a multilateral development bank, part of the IDB group. And I think that for multilaterals and all the banks can play a relevant role in accelerating not only circular economy, but sustainable investment after all. So at IDB Group, for example, our vision is it's focused on 5 pillars. And one of them is promoting digital economy, supporting SMEs, and obviously climate change. So as part of this vision, we work in different levels. First, I think that we work at a national and regional level, working with governments and other key stakeholders in the region so that we can enable policies. We enable the dialogue, the knowledge and platforms that could lead to a legal environment or a legal framework or environment that can favor air circularity. For example, the bank, the public side of the IDB group, has helped promote and has helped different countries, for example, in the Pacific Alliance, to develop a roadmap for the sustainable management of plastics. Also, we have been supporting business associations in the design and implementation of the frameworks and the mechanics for these companies to embrace these new regulations and extend also to the producer responsibility. And obviously on the public side, we also support the progress in inclusive recycling programs. And we have certain platforms like Latitude R and promote efforts on reducing food waste through Sin Desperdicio. It's a no waste platform. And obviously we work with you with UNEP in different strategic partnerships like the Regional Coalition on Circular Economy. This is like the first level that we work on. The second, I will say that we support the financial sector, and I will go to the second level, which is the financial sector level. It is important that we all speak the same language in terms of what we understand in terms of circularity and what our circularity model is. So being mindful of that, the work that we're doing is, for example, to set up the level field and to contribute with initiatives that can use relevant taxonomies in the region on circular economy, promoting financing and the development of measurement indicators that allow determining the impact that is achieved. So with that, for example, we're working in Colombia, and we're working with a national development bank, which is Bancoldex, and 2 commercial banks. So we can identify first the taxonomy so that we have the same definitions and we understand the same through the system. Then we are also identifying the market needs and what the market also understands. And then we identify different financing products that the banks can deploy and how they can also support not only the corporates and the big companies, but also the SMEs through the value chain. And then I will go to a third level, which is like to go directly to financial institutions. And at IDV Invest, we work to promote the acceleration of the circular economy by providing a value proposition that combines not only financing through innovative financial products, but also bringing third-party financiers, like what we call mobilization, and combine it with advisory services. Why is this important? It's important because we support the financial institution to transition to a new way of identifying, measuring risk, measuring how they are entering these new models of manufacturing and how they can support them. So we identify, for example, the capacity that the institution has, what are the gaps, how we can support them in identifying risks, impacts, indicators, monitoring, and then transform this into financial products that are well received and that the clients are able to use. So I guess we go through 3 levels, if I can summarize it that way, like from the national, regional level, then we go to the sector, and then we can provide support not only on the financing side, but also with advisory services to our financial institutions clients. So I will leave it there, Peggy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marisela. It's impressive to see all these levels of intervention that you have and the role that you play to promote, for instance, the public-private dialogue and collaboration. So thank you for this. And so now I would be interested to have your view, Jean-Luc, from your entrepreneur standpoint.
Well, Peggy, first of all, thanks for having me to this amazing event. And what I'd like to start with is maybe introducing Laverne. We basically provide high quality tailored recycled plastic resins to meet large brand owners' products performance requirements at competitive price. We take millions of world's thrown away plastics and make them new again. From trash, we create new products, and we start new life for that material. For companies around the globe in automotive, appliances, and electronics and furniture industries, we give cost-effective innovations and production so that they can not only improve their bottom line, but help the environment as they are basically reducing tremendously their carbon footprint. Laverne is a medium-sized company with high growth potential. So our key challenge in financing the growth required the increasing demands for recycled plastics and need for alternative divergent plastics. So financial institutions have the perceptions that investing in circular businesses is a higher risk probably due to new processes and characteristics. For example, some investors have the perception that recycled plastics is a challenge over virgin plastics, possibly due to the expectation that they are higher cost and lower performance resins, and also the lack of understanding of the positive impact on the environment. However, a tailored recycled plastics resins can offer same performance as virgin resins at competitive price. For us to help the ease the concerns of the financial institutions and accelerate their journeys towards financing circularity, I believe it's important to share success stories. To this, strategic partnerships and collaborations are key. And you're going to hear me say this very often, collaborations. I best by me showing you what we'd like to prove is by example. So I've got two success stories, examples for Laverne we have been working with. One is Dr. Pepper Keurig, and the other one is HP. In November 2020, our international partner, Dr. Pepper, announced that the new Keurig K Mini and K Mini Plus coffee makers are made with 20% or more of our material. Whereas the example for Keurig is quite new. HP has been working with Laverne for more than 2 decades to optimize the use of post-consumer products, post-consumer recycled plastics in HP's products. You can actually learn more about this strategic partnerships in the WCEF Expo Showcase under the partnership tabs, where the partnerships is actually analyzed in a new business case by the Ivy Business School. To close these questions to accelerate financings of circularity, it is important to demonstrate example that the risk of investing in these new areas of growth is manageable and it can positively impact our world and environment.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And I pick up a few words which I think are particularly strong in what you said. Sharing success stories, demonstrating that the risk is manageable, showing the positive impact. All this is essential. I suggest we now move on and focus on SMEs and how we can best support SMEs to identify circular opportunities and to get funding to transition. And I will first turn to you, Jean-Luc, as entrepreneur. So what support do you need and how to best support SMEs to engage into the transition and to get funding?
With the first question, as I mentioned, that Laverne values collaboration and strategic partnerships. To help SMEs identify circular opportunities, it is especially important to build strategic partnerships to identify circular opportunities together. Laverne helps transactional business move to a more circular business model for plastics. Because we had long-term partnerships, we're able to grow and develop new capabilities as needed. I will share 3 examples where we grew with our customers to more circular solutions. One is by using our ocean-bound plastics from our 80 factory into HP personal systems. Another one was General Motors, where we actually used end-of-life bottles from their factories, mixing with our own recycled feedstock to make headlamp retainers. And the third one was our e-waste feedstock is transformed into various parts for Dyson products. All of this are done through tiers 1s and 2s at scales, which in turns makes their business much more sustainable. Financial investors must have a different criteria when supporting the growth of circular businesses. These businesses model differs from linear traditional companies because in circular businesses, we need to have higher level of inventories, supply, and new infrastructures built to support growth. The financial institute is required to have patient capital to finance the growth of key ideas and new technologies. For example, at Laverne, we are in situations where we built and they will come, but we must build the recycling facilities before we can start selling. Therefore, collaborations from the beginning is key.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. So yeah, collaboration, strategic partnerships, and you also highlight the importance of patient capital. I'm sure we're going to comment further on this. Maricela, I now turn to you, and I would be interested to have your emerging market perspective on this question of how to best support SMEs.
Thank you, Peggy. Well, I think that we need to start by understanding that the SMEs are a diverse group. not just when comparing SME with Europe, Canada, and Latin America, but also in terms of the types of SMEs. Some are startups embracing innovative models and high growth potential and seeking early stage capital, whereas others may be more traditional SMEs with limited growth and limited access to financing, servicing the local markets. So others will be more integrated into the regional value chains. So with that in mind, I think that some SMEs may have the opportunity to innovate and to transform into a circular model, but others may play an enabling role in the circular transition of larger companies. For instance, by collecting recyclable material, as Jean-Luc was saying, or by offering repairing services, technologies. We have discussed all this, but they won't be circular per se. So by identifying these circular opportunities in SMEs can be like twofold. First, I think that those that will adhere to taxonomies that identify the circular models, and two, those that work through the value chain and enable a circular economy transition model. So from our perspective, what we want and what we seek is to unlock the financing to both, either through financial institutions as we support them and that will on lend to the SMEs, or by supporting anchor companies that could also work through their own value chain and support all the different type of SMEs that are either providers or clients from them. So at IDV Invest, for example, we have different programs, and we have a value chain program where we support the anchor corporate company and provide lines so that they can support and deploy in financing to the SMEs that work with them. So they know them, they have been their clients or providers for a long time, so they know their risk tolerance, their risk appetite, and how they are evolving in their own business models. That's on one side. And on the other side, from the financial institutions perspective, we support the financial institutions so that they can know more about the SMEs, develop a strategy towards supporting the SMEs. And obviously, if we want the SMEs to be more circular, we can also support that and give them advice and technical assistance so that they can also develop the models internally to be more risk appetite friendly, so to say, but to support the models and to identify the different terms, the different ways that they are having in the business models of the SMEs. We can also support them with financing, advisory, and identify a whole strategy on circular economy so that they can increase the financing and unlock this limited access to financing that the SMEs are having. I will leave it there, Peggy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Marisela. And yeah, very interesting to see the variety of support that can be brought to SMEs to meet their different needs. Jan, let me now hand over to you. In your view, how to best support SMEs?
Well, we also should have a look at the chat. I think there's some good questions there. Some people tagged me, so I'm going to address those. Does ABN AMRO finance outside of Europe? Yes, but there are de-risking conditions that there should be an attachment or a strategic alliance with a legal entity based out of Europe, preferably out of the Netherlands, but with some actually conditions, these can be worked out. Then there was a question specifically on biofuels and bio accelerants. Yes, that's a space, the chemical industry is a space where ABN AMRO is active. And it's a very promising space because I think this is an area where things for SMEs can happen. I think the big companies are often tied into their habits. I'm not saying they're not innovating because they have large innovation budgets, but SMEs definitely can enter those chemical catalyst spaces where their labs are more agile and where they can build the bioreactors in a smaller scale, and then obviously try to collaborate with bigger ones to increase their market share. There's a plug in the chat for a report that I wrote on behalf of Chatham House together with Patrick Schroeder. The link is there. Please do visit that link. It's on the Chatham House website. It's called Financing an Inclusive Circular Economy, and we address specifically how to de-risk investments, very relevant for SMEs. Now, I'll get to the question that you asked. I hope the audience that asked questions in the chat is satisfied with my replies. Now, I think that with the cases I've seen, that there's really some good examples, for example, in companies scrutinizing their value chain on how to move from basically what is traditionally a linear model, like the construction sector, the real estate development sector. They tear down a building, they create as little evidence of what was previously there, and then start all over again. I mean, we've seen this all around the world. Now, we have been financing some examples called transformation projects, where up to 60% of the original structure was safeguarded for being the basis of what would be the new building, the new function, right? That brings about a new way of circular thinking. It brings about thinking about circular material marketplaces. So that means you involve your competitors in actually offering secondary materials that they could buy to put into another building, etc. So it changes kind of the dynamic of how you do the procurement of the materials that you need for completing the construction. We see some successful things in that with interior elements. So a whole set of doors, we're thinking about hundreds of doors, diligently taking out of a building, then being put on sale as secondary materials. They were gone in a minute. In Holland, there's quite a hype around circular buildings. So constructors are really looking for sets of homogeneous recycled goods that are still functional. And these doors were functional, so they got sold as a batch quite quickly. Same goes for windows, things like that. I mean, the most crazy things you can take out of buildings have a value. So I think that's a good example. What becomes exciting is that these construction companies traditionally don't have a very strong digital backbone, and to construct a secondary materials marketplace, they need a digital partner to actually partner with to make them stronger. So I think the SMEs play a crucial role in spotting the hiatus or the gaps in the business model of those larger companies. Because if they want to become circular, they definitely have got often no clue, but often they need a lot of capacity that they lack within the structure of their old business model that they've been successful with. So I'm seeing a lot of SMEs plug on to, for example, the construction sector to solve the tricky bits, you know. And it could be also in transporting the materials to the site. We've seen some companies buy ships to bring construction elements over water to building sites, which lowers the CO2. It takes you kind of into the climate debate, right? So my advice to SMEs is try to study the gap between linear and circular of larger companies that you see, that you have an affinity with. Try to plug on in a partnership your business and piggyback, not always easy. Build the relationships to be able to piggyback on the larger success of the linear companies. That's definitely a strategy I've seen a lot in the last 5 years. And I think I'll finish with a call that has been particularly striking. I mean, the energy transition, we'll see the world moving away from fossil fuels, right? In the coming decade, in the coming 30 years. All of this, what we're constructing now, batteries, the electrical wiring, the beautiful electrical vehicles that we see on the roads more and more, very few of them, I would even say hardly any of them, have been constructed with a circular mindset. So there's incredible opportunity because we're going to hit a resource scarcity if we want to really replace all these fossil operations that are there with renewables. And that's where the circular economy comes in. And that's where the recycling of battery packs, even wind turbines that get replaced by more powerful ones, solar panels, all come into play. So I think the whole energy transition, which is unavoidable due to the climate emergency that we are in the 10 to 30 years ahead of us, will give incredible opportunity for SMEs to jump in and to actually improve the game. I'll mention one, and I'll close with that. University of Eindhoven harbors a SME that has developed lightweight solar panels, half the weight, and they are fully recyclable, and they do not contain hazardous materials. That's a perfect example of a need that we will have in the future. The first need we had was make solar panels efficient, make them work, prove that they are financially viable. Financial institutions now finance them as if they're commodities, right? So there's not much questioning there. But the next step is really, are they environmentally sound, and can we actually recycle them at the end of their life after 25 years, after 20 or 30 years, right? So lots of examples. Study any value chain and you see ample opportunity for SMEs in the circular economy space, because there's so little of it present now. And the coming 30 years are really going to raise the bar on circularity.
Thank you so much, Jan, for this very long and complete thoughts that you share with us. And it's, yeah, I think it's really interesting to see that you all agree on one point. Support to SMEs is not only about providing financing. It goes well beyond that. It's about supporting to understand the value chain, to partner, to unlock new opportunities, identify new opportunities, unlock new mechanisms, etc. It's also about innovating together. And that brings me to our last question. And I will ask you to be very brief to answer to this last question, because we're running late. So please be brief if we want to let us time for a Q&A session with our audience. So our last question is how can we stimulate financial innovation, which is absolutely key to better finance circularity? So Jean-Luc, why don't you start off? And very briefly, please.
Yeah, very quickly. I get what Jan was talking about. I guess a perfect example. We have companies such as these big, large brand owners that actually are not aware how they go about. So they use SMEs like us to get their circularity going. So for us, we believe that ways is to show financial institutions, investors that are motivated by that, the actual transparency is an advantage and the risk of the risk to mitigate the risk of new technologies. So if you go to a Laverne facility, for instance, you're able to see in real life what we could actually transform the end-of-life product back into resin. They could ask expert. And today, even with the complexity of having this pandemic where we're limited by travel, we even introduced the visit virtually. So we could actually show our clients or finance institutions how we do this. So I guess in our case, we believe that by being very transparent, by being very have the integrity to work with the large brand owners, are able for us SMEs to really get on through circularity at a very good space and at scale.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Thank you, and thank you, you're having short. Jan, what do you see on your side as key elements to stimulate financial innovation?
Well, a key element in banking is that risk committees are often the key to whether you get the loan or not, or whether an investment happens or not. These risk committees have to judge opportunities in a wide range of sectors. So I think SMEs often underestimate the level of knowledge or the lack of knowledge that is within these financial institutions about what they actually do. So I'm really echoing a little bit of what Laverne was saying. Is what Laverne Plastics is doing is great. I mean, even a virtual tour to educate your partners that give you part of your financial working capital. Much more time needs to go into that than you would expect. And it's going to be tedious sometimes, because people are going to ask questions that you think wouldn't be possible that anybody could ask. You know, don't they know? Because the SMEs are often subject matter experts, and banks are, or financial partners are generalists, right? They go for the best opportunity. So I think educating the financial partner is, an extra effort, an extra expense, an extra cost, but it could be very rewarding for an SME. So you have to strategize on that, on how you're going to educate the other side who might not be in the know of what you're actually doing and why your product is actually a sound solution for the problem at hand.
Thank you, Jan. I will now turn to you, Marisela. Your team is dedicated to providing innovative solutions to your clients. So I'd be interested to have your view on this question. How can we stimulate financial innovation?
Yes, thank you. Well, I couldn't agree more in terms of educating and making the financial institution understand the business model, how they're going to be repaid, because at the end, it's like they want to know how they're going to be repaid. So they need to understand the whole model, how they're going to get there, measure risks, monitor. We have been discussing that. In that sense, I guess from my perspective as a multilateral development bank, what we do is also that we want to have new asset classes coming to the markets. And we have been discussing and providing support, not only through financing, but also in advisory services of thematic bonds, where we have the green bonds, for example, and we provide the financial institutions with the whole structuring, but also the means to understand the portfolio that they are financing on one side, and then having also the KPIs and the monitoring capacity so that they understand what they're doing and they are following up and showing also the public. I like what Jean-Luc was saying about showing the lessons learned, showing the experiences. So I guess that being part of a capital markets and developing through these innovative structuring products, it's really important. Then another thing that I would like to add is regarding products like blended finance. As a development bank, we also provide this type of combination of concessional financing that we can have. Actually, we have different funds that we administer and manage from Canada, by the way, that we can provide concessional financing so that we can support innovative models that probably a financial or commercial bank wouldn't do it if there is no a part of first loss, for example, or even sharing the risk. So I guess the blended finance can be also one of the instruments that we could use to stimulate more innovative products and obviously innovative business models. Of course, it's not used for everything. It has to be a very innovative way, and we can pilot different models because of that. And I think that's and to add, and I know that you want us to be fast, so I will leave it there, Peggy.
Thank you, Marisela. And so yeah, as we're running out of time, I propose we jump directly into our Q&A session to see what are the thoughts and questions of our audience. So maybe a first one to all of you. In the audience, somebody says, I heard the word growth. Shouldn't we be aiming to degrowth? Isn't that the fundamental idea of circular economy? I would like to ask the panelists to comment on this. Are we still thinking about growth, or are we talking about development of ideas, technologies to support, enable transitioning to circular economy?
Yeah, I'd like to take that one.
Yeah.
I think the Achilles heel of the whole circular economy concept is the rebound effect. The rebound effect has been very well documented. Once you make things cheaper, more energy efficient, more resource efficient, we start using a lot more of them. And that's where actually the advantage of being more resource efficient, more energy efficient, cleaner, sometimes goes lost because it simply gets used. Think of car sharing. Car sharing is a great idea, but it also comes at a cost because the car gets used more intensively and actually degrades quicker. And there could also be this effect of it's not mine, I just use it for an hour or a day, so I take less care of it. These are all things that happen, behavioral things that happen within the circular economy that could offset the advantages of having a circular business model. So there's a lot of literature on that. It's acknowledged, but that doesn't mean it's solved. I think indeed the key aspect, if you talk about resource efficiency, is that we can transition to a wanted state of a cleaner, more prosperous economy fitting within our planet's resources, and then degrowth in selective areas will have to be there. But I think degrowth is already happening, for example, for hazardous materials. But then we see growth in many unwanted resources that, end up in places that we don't want them to be. So I wouldn't particularly say degrowth, but I'm going to quote a famous author here. And he said, a material in the wrong place is a toxin, right? And you have to think about it like that. So it's not the material per se that there's too much of, but probably there's too much of the material in the wrong place. If it hits the ocean, it's probably in the wrong place, right? So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when you're working on circular economy. Does what we are financing now, does it meet its purpose? Which for me and for the bank I work for is really contributing to the industrial ecology, to a better ecology, a better opportunity for biodiversity to flourish, mitigation of the climate. So all these factors come into play. And I agree, they're not always met because of the rebound effect.
Thank you, Jan. I see somebody else wants to react on this one, Marisela or Jean-Luc?
Sure. In our case, growth is actually amazing because we don't need to dig for oil to get new plastics. There's enough end-of-life plastics in this world to make our products. So our growth is actually positive. It's been proven when we process our product, you get about a 90% reductions in carbon footprint using our recycled product over virgin. So you don't need fossil fuel to make plastics, and that's a growth. I believe those are the kinds of growth you want to see. In our case, also, when you make plastics circular, we've been with clients that have been with us. Like I said, the HP is a 20-year client. We've been circulating the ink cartridge for more than 20 years. And that product is not made with new plastic. It's made with our product times and times. We've got maybe more than 10 pass of this product as an example. So I think you have to use the word in the right perspective. In our case, we need more growth.
Marisela, do you want to jump into this one also?
No, actually, I was in line with what Jean-Luc is saying. It's like we need growth at the end, but it's the right growth and in the right way. We need to have a sustainable and inclusive growth. And it's just a matter of transition to that. It's not what we do now. It's how we can transition to that so that we understand how to do it and do it in a sustainable way. Thank you, Peggy.
Okay, thank you. So I think we are not going to have much time for other questions. So I will ask you just to close our first part of the session to maybe share with the audience as a concluding remark. What would be, according to you, 1 or 2 key actions to be taken in the next 12 months to scale up circularity financing? And you have 30 seconds each, no more, please. And we'll start with you, Marisela, then Jean-Luc, and then Jan to close.
Thank you. I think that for us, it's more advocacy, more sharing information, sharing the business models and how they work. And obviously, last comment is like the success of the circular economy requires to have the suitable ecosystem. So we need this holistic approach so that we include not only the corporates and the financial institutions, but the whole value chain, so that we can include financing, innovation, collaboration, and obviously support in advising the companies on how to do it. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you, Jean-Luc.
In our case, as I've been saying, we need this. We can't be alone to do this. So you need to have a collaborative partnership environment where you learn by doing. Transparency and integrity must be part of your DNA. And this is as simple as it is. Without that, really hard to make circularity work.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Jan?
I think a shift from the purely financial to a more value-driven approach, where you take into account the natural capital, the human capital, the social capital, those are ways of accounting that I see gaining traction within the financial community. And I think that needs to speed up. So in that case, an investment case of an SME that comes with a circular business model to a bank or a financial institution is not judged on its merit of solely what it will bring in a financial sense, but also what it can mean for natural capital, for resource efficiency, for the people that need to process it. How well are they treated, or how badly? I mean, or does it solve a social issue? And I think those things get more traction, as I said, within the risk committees that need to actually vet the deal and say whether they get the credit or not. So I'm happy to see that, but it's very early, and it could, if you ask me in 30 seconds, it could get much more scale in the industry.
Thank you so much, Jan. And so we are now closing our session. And so thank you to the three of you. Thank you to the audience for your great questions. We unfortunately didn't have time to answer too many of them. They were really great. And it's now my pleasure to hand things over to my colleague, Paul Charlhouse, who will help us shift from a global perspective to a more local Canadian focus. Paul, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peggy. What a great set of insights we've just had, and some great links floating around in the chat box too to really good resources. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining the session today. My name is Paul Shorthouse. I'm Managing Director of Circular Economy Leadership Canada. We're a network of networks, essentially people in Canada and organizations trying to accelerate the transition to circular economy. We're really thrilled at the opportunity to partner with UNEP FI and Globe Series in helping to deliver this important accelerator session. We also recognize the really big importance of the finance sector in helping to catalyze the systems change that we really need to see to move more towards circular economy as a whole system. We're now going to shift into the second part of our virtual event. I'd encourage you all to take a moment just to stand up and stretch, move around a little bit, maybe refresh your coffee if you're out here out west where I am in Victoria, where it's still morning, or grab some water, or take a short break if you need to, just to stand up and stretch. I'd also like to invite you now to share in the chat box about the object or item that you identified in your workspace that conjures up the importance of accelerating the transition to a circular economy. You might recall Elizabeth planted that question right at the very beginning of this session. So she also asked me to do the same thing. I looked around my office space here, and to be honest, it was actually pretty tricky. It was actually a little bit challenging to find something that really represented circular economy to me, which is really food for thought to say, everything in our workspace should be circular to some degree. I did find, some recycled paper. I found some refillable ink for my printer. But at the end of the day, I settled on this object here, which I'm just going to hold up to the camera. It's a growler, basically a refillable beer bottle container. And I started asking myself, why do I have an empty beer bottle container in my office? But at the end of the day, the point of this being that, this is coming from a local brewery on Vancouver Island, where I'm based in Canada. They have a very community-focused approach to how they make their beer. They source a lot of local ingredients. They supply it for the community first and foremost, and they serve it up in this sort of reusable, refillable, very durable glass bottle that is also recyclable at the end of its life. So you can go back and refill it for new beer all the time. So it kind of brings together, for me anyway, multiple aspects of circular economy and strategies and principles. So that was mine. Again, please share yours in the chat box. Any item that you found in your environment that you think is particularly circular. And we'll give you a moment to do that. See if we have any interesting ones coming in. Oh, someone's got a worm composter bin in their office. That's impressive. Must be a gardener. Reusable cup system. A company in Victoria offering reusable cups, wool slippers. Wow, cool. Lots of great ideas and examples coming in. Oh, a plant. Very good. We got to make that connection between circular economy and biodiversity and clean ecosystems. Great. Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, everybody. Continue to throw some ideas in the chat box. Thanks to everybody that participated in this exercise. And it's now my pleasure to hand things over back to Elizabeth Shirt from Globe for the second part of our series and session here, where we'll jump into more of the Canadian context. Elizabeth, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul, for leading that fun exercise. So I had a couple of objects that I identified. First was this blouse, which I actually picked up at a local Vancouver consignment store. The pillow behind me here is repurposed from our Globe Forum 2020 event, which for lots of us was the last time our sustainability community here in Canada and North America got together in person. And I have my favorite and trusted Bubba coffee cup that keeps my coffee warm all day, which is, so I love my reusable cup. So thanks for those of you sharing in the chat your ideas. So thanks also to our audience members who've either stuck around or joined the session just now for this second component, where we're going to be focusing more specifically on opportunities and challenges of scaling up circular finance in Canada. We're going to have the chance to hear from a group of leaders from a diversity of backgrounds and experiences in Canada's financial industry, including Jonathan Hackett from BMO, Michaela Gregory from NEI Investments, Gildas Poissonnier from Desjardins, and Michelle Bonner from Van City. I'm going to be engaging each speaker in a little different way in a one-on-one interview, but with a small twist. At the close of each rapid fire interview, we'll be joined by the next speaker to pose the final question. So we're going to get a chance to see these experts really engaging one another. You should still, though, be posing your questions in the chat. We're going to have time at the end for Q&A with all speakers at the end of the hour. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Jonathan Hackett from BMO to join me on the screen. Welcome, Jonathan, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So I want to jump right in, and as our first sort of Canadian-focused speaker, I want to start by asking, what's the opportunity or what's the potential, return for banks like BMO to get more involved in circular finance, and also what are some of the key risks that you might have identified?
Yeah, so from an opportunity side, there are a few different layers to it. The first and one that's central to the bank's purpose of boldly growing the good in business of life is just working with clients that are solving problems. Fundamental to finance is how do we help our clients grow, and this is a place where we see a great opportunity to work with new clients, a lot of them, to help them grow their business. I think the second really does relate to how we see the energy transition at the bank. So we think of the energy transition as the change in how we both produce and consume energy, but also how we empower organizations to reduce their need to consume energy. And the circular economy really does represent something beyond, adding renewable energy capacity or beyond, just reducing the reliance on fossil fuels, the ability to change how we're consuming and using energy along the way. And so as we help companies in the circular economy grow, we're helping our clients solve their challenges broadly on the transition to net zero and helping really build the solutions that we need to see in the economy. The challenges are an interesting one, though. And I know, in the last panel, a lot of these were touched on. But the real challenge I see in financing that sits for this circular economy rather than for the traditional economy comes from the fact that there's a new set of reliance for a company that's circular. The inputs that they need are not necessarily the same commodities, the same easily accessible products, and ones that you pay for. A lot of times companies are saying, well, I receive my inputs for free, or I get paid to take my inputs, and that's a benefit. But from a financing perspective, it's actually a risk. It's one that we need to understand and we need to account for, because often those are contracted, but with not terms that are favorable to a user of those products. So you might say, I get tipping fees for the, for the products that I'm using in my process, but those tipping fees usually mean that nobody owes you that product. And if we need you to be producing in order for you to be a viable business, if nobody brings in your inputs and you don't have any outputs, that's a risk that we take in as a financing. And so part of what we think about a lot is how do you de-risk what is happening within that, and how do we get some of the tools that have worked elsewhere in the economy to come into the circular economy?
That's great framing. Thanks, Jonathan. I'm wondering if you can dig a bit more into that, that specific risk that you flagged, and how, what are opportunities to de-risk, to overcome that kind of challenge?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I wear two very different hats within the bank. We have an impact investment fund that deploys the bank's equity into companies that are in the venture and growth stage. And there, a lot of the things that I think are the traditional stories about the circular economy are very exciting, where you say, well, there's a massive upside. I can get paid on both sides. But the second you're providing debt, where you don't have the upside on a better return, you just need to know you're going to get paid back. A lot of what we think about from a debt financing perspective is, how do we ask you to take a lower return overall in your business to know that it'll be more stable? So contracts that guarantee payment for non-delivery, things that essentially remove those different elements of risk. I saw very briefly in the comments, didn't see the full comment, but the word insurance, which is a great one, where the ability to have someone that has a performance guarantee on a different step in the process, whether it's a new technology that we've not financed before, or an ability to guarantee the delivery of those inputs by insuring out some of the risks that might sit there, whether it's the price of glass going to a very new level and suddenly there are other pathways that can get used, or just insuring against the performance of underlying assets that feed into your process.
Thanks for to Rolly for asking that question on insurance. It's a great segue. It's almost like I planted it. I didn't, but I did want to ask you, Jonathan. I mean, given some of that risk you flagged in terms of some of the inputs, how we might overcome that. Who are some of the other players that you'd like to see at the table to really maximize that opportunity to scale up circular finance, and insurance, being one of them?
Yeah. So I think about a lot of the time, how do we replicate the tools and the structures that we have in other parts of the economy? The traditional economy is, I don't know if efficient is the right term, but it has a lot of supplements and structures that allow it to operate it as efficiently as it can. And so insurance is a great example of that. I think broadening the pool of investors that are playing and making sure that they're aligned to not just, how do I maximize my returns, but also how do I maximize the growth and scale of this company and the ability to bring things up to what we need to see in the economy, and allowing for the fact that might mean taking near-term value off the table in order to build that longer-term value that we would see by having those companies achieve that scale. I think the other piece, and one that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is all of the pieces around commodities, all of the contracts that we need from a global markets perspective, finding ways to bring those in. I was discussing this with a company that is involved in the carbon to value part of the circular economy, where they were creating a useful product from carbon. And their question was, how do I get a contract on carbon? I went down a path. I'm like, well, carbon pricing, very complicated. You've got to look at regulatory versus voluntary carbon. So like, no. I need carbon dioxide in order to make what I make. I make a valuable product. If I can't get that from a waste stream, if somebody else is suddenly competing for it because of a regulatory credit somewhere, how do I contract my supply, either directly or hedge against the risk of suddenly somebody else needing that carbon? And so we need all of those tools in order to be able to take that baseline risk down, to guarantee that there'll be underlying performance. And then we can pile massive amounts of debt into these companies, which sounds bad when I say it that way, but really does allow you to grow a lot faster and provide more returns to those investors as well.
Awesome. We've just touched the tip of the iceberg here. I want to now take the opportunity to invite Michaela Gregory from NEI Investments to join on screen. And Michaela, before we dig in with you, what question do you have for John?
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's great to be here with all of you today, and great to hear your comments, Jonathan. I think just segueing off of the conversation that you both have been having, I would love to hear your thoughts on maybe one unique opportunity that you think the bank has in its position with so many different actors in the system to really influence a movement towards circularity in a circular economy.
Yeah, so I'll actually use a very live example for us right now. There are companies that we are working with. Trove is actually a company our impact investment fund is invested in, that are creating tools and platforms for companies to build circularity into what they do. So Trove works with clothing companies that have used clothing markets, and rather than having that operate in a kind of a shadowy gray market, bringing those in, providing some level of quality and oversight to make sure that they are able to resell their goods and build into their overall story the idea that they're providing the support for circular use of their products. And I think the ability to leverage the connection we have with our traditional clients, the big companies that have been around for years, that are receiving that influence, that pressure from their stakeholders, whether it's investors, whether it's their customers, whether it's their employees even, to improve how they're operating within an environmental context and a circularity context, the ability to bring solutions to them and to introduce them to companies that are creating those platforms and those tools. That's one of the things that we think is a great opportunity for the bank.
Awesome. Jonathan, thank you so much. I know this has been rapid fire, but please don't go too far because we're going to bring you back. We're going to go to the audience Q&A, but you can take a break for now and we'll see you back here in a little bit. Michaela, great to have you here. I need to, we do love a good segue in Canada. I'm just responding to some of the comments in the chat. I don't know if it's a Canadian thing, but apparently it is because we sure appreciate a good one. With that in mind, Michaela joining us from NEI Investments, love to hear from you about what's the role of equity investors in driving and scaling circular economy business opportunities, and what are some of the barriers that you're seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Elizabeth. And I think throughout our discourse in this presentation and, in the panel that was before us, we've really been hearing about the unique opportunities that a number of different actors have in advancing circularity. And I think for us at NEI, we've really leaned into active ownership and using our ability as an investor to be able to encourage companies forward and to really be able to advocate for a movement towards circularity and sustainable long-term value creation overall. And so we're often involved and we see it as important in terms of engaging with companies and having an understanding of the opportunities they see for integrating circularity into their business. And then outside of that, also taking a step back to look at the overarching landscape at play and integrating our voices and putting our thoughts out there as well when it comes on to a policy perspective, in thinking about what are some of the changes that we would like to see happen on an industry-wide basis that could facilitate greater corporate action individually as well. And so to segue then into the barriers, I think the barriers are actually, on one side of the coin, it's a barrier, but on the other side, I think it's also an opportunity. And the need for cohesive action by a number of actors to facilitate meaningful progress. And so what that means is we all have to figure out how we have some ownership over what this movement will look like. But I also think that there are some awesome opportunities that are in play when it comes on to thinking about collaboration. And one example in Canada that we know is one that many of you around the world can relate to is the Plastics Pact and the Canadian version of the Plastics Pact. And so that's one that, for example, we may bring up with companies when we engage with them to ask them if they've ever considered how they can, delve into a relationship with other players across the value chain of plastics to come up with some innovative solutions.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. So you mentioned the opportunity around sort of broader policy direction and collaboration. What does that look like? And does that mean we need, we hear conversations, for example, in the net zero and climate space, we need better definitions, metrics, frameworks. Is that a barrier? Is that something we need more of? And if so, what do we do in the short term to sort of meet that need so we can really move forward without spinning our wheels on digging deep into definitions and frameworks? What does that look like in your mind?
I think that's, a good point, Elizabeth. Definitely standardization in terms of data and metrics will help us all speak the same language, will ease the burden on all of us in terms of evaluating what progress looks like. But that being said, I also think we need to be a little bit comfortable with the current discomfort that exists right now. And I think we'll have to accept that a movement towards standardization is just that. It's a movement, and there may be some growing pains in the process as well. And from our perspective, then I think it really starts with aligning with the goals, aligning on the goals for circularity, and thinking about, the themes of how circularity then helps us mitigate the issues that we know exist, biodiversity loss, climate change, and an increased amount of waste, for example. And so from an investor perspective, then, I think it starts with thinking about coordinated efforts with other investors, figuring out how we can be relaying through investors who think similarly on the value of a circular economy, relaying a similar tone in terms of what our expectations are of companies, and also relaying the same level of support for companies as they move forward on this trajectory towards circularity. And so, that may mean that in the interim, we have to do a bit more company-specific digging. It may mean that we'll have to invest a little bit more time and resources into understanding a company's motivations when it comes on to certain actions or innovations that they take. But I think as we start, generally moving towards that shift and encouraging that action, that will give us the information that we need, that we can then have a more robust dialogue, re-standardization with standard setters on.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. Thanks for those thoughtful remarks. And so I know this is, again, it's been sort of rapid fire. We want to keep things moving and engaging for our audience. So it's my pleasure now to invite Gildas Poissonnier from Desjardins to join us on screen. And Gildas, love to invite you to pose a question for your colleague, Michaela.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Michaela, yes, pleasure to be with you today. How do we more clearly make the link to climate with circular economy from an investor's perspective in your mind?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important question, Gildas. Thank you. And I think to start, it would be appropriate and important for us to consider how we can evaluate the progress and the success of circularity efforts by infusing some of the indicators that we're already familiar with on the climate front. And hopefully, as we increase our knowledge with respect to biodiversity, we can consider further integration there as well. But if we use plastics as an example, is one example. We know, of course, that there is a cost that comes with production and incineration of plastics. And if we take a broader approach and move beyond plastics, and we can think about all the energy and resources that go into an input or product, and that then naturally brings in that climate consideration, right? Like, how can we maximize the energy that we use to facilitate, whether it be more outputs with a lesser amount of energy, or to expand the life of an output with the same amount of energy. And so I think thinking and incorporating that element into the discourse on a circular economy is one of the ways we can further that dialogue, for sure.
Thanks, Michaela. It makes me think back to the first panel where we had the conversation about we got to rethink growth, right? And so as we think about those opportunities to make those linkages between climate and net zero, it is about, you know, what have we traditionally seen as growth and what's that new opportunity to be more efficient. So fantastic. Michaela, I'm going to invite you to take a quick break off camera, but don't go too far because I'm going to bring you back. Gildas, thanks so much for being here. So, you know, I've heard you talk about the importance of buy-in and commitment from leadership to really result in meaningful change. And that's a big, important driver in terms of sustainability for Desjardins. So could you talk a bit more about how you're seeing that commitment play out in your organization, and why is it so important in this particular case of financing circularity?
Sure, yes, Elizabeth. First, well, at Desjardins Group, commitment from our leadership on circular economy is clear. How does it play out? Well, mostly by setting the tone and leading by example in the development and promotion of circular economy. For example, our CEO, Mr. Cormier, publicly speaks about sustainability and circular economy in particular during conferences with our own employees. He also publishes articles in the press on the topic and participates in conference on the topic. But you know that commitment also goes further, and Desjardins support to circular economy takes many different forms, I could say. For example, currently we are about to start a tour within Quebec, within the province of Quebec, a tour organized in partnership with the Quebec Federation of Chambers of Commerce about circular economy. Well, as you may know, the Federation is the largest network of business people and businesses in Quebec. It's about 130 chambers. You have about 1,000 corporate members. So what we will do in particular in that tour is to support two initial training sessions, like a kind of circular economy 101. Then there will be 17 regional sessions, one in each Quebec's regions. So this will bring support from local resources on the topic, and also we'll have some data points, you know, through surveys to measure the evolution of the knowledge of the participant on circular economy. Another example, we developed a communication material, a video that was published on YouTube by Desjardins on the example of real life example of circular economy in action from Desjardins business members. I will put it on the chat after my intervention so that maybe folks can look at it. It's great, it's concrete, and I think it could create idea. So why is this commitment from our leadership so important for us in the case of financing of the circular economy? Well, I would say that because we as financier, we are just able to finance projects and companies that that we do have in our networks and in our ecosystem, if you like. So our circular economy strategy would just remain a form of wishful thinking than more wishful thinking than a reality if no one in our ecosystem is trying to grasp those opportunities, testing new circular strategies and moving away from that linear economic model. So when our CEO speaks about circular economy, what does he do? Well, he develops awareness, he mobilizes Canadian and Quebec entrepreneurs and leaders to develop their skills in that space. So in a nutshell, I would say leadership buy-in is essential to drive project generation and to source financing opportunities in the circular economy.
Fantastic. And thanks for offering to share that resource in the chat, Gildas, after your remarks. I wanted to dig into another example of that commitment that I'm aware of, which is that Desjardins has been investing in research on circular economy pilot projects through a circular innovation lab in Quebec, including one on construction. And I know our colleague Paul just joined from a built environment session earlier today. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about the business case for those investments and those pilots.
Yes, sure. First, let me reiterate the economic importance of circular economy opportunities. You know, multiple reports in recent years have been released now, and they estimate the size of sustainable finance and the circular economy opportunity in the multi-billion dollars. And for most industry, for most of our members, sustainable practice like circular economy, it means cost reduction from lower energy use, reduced material consumption. So basically, businesses can't avoid shifting to a circular economy if they want to keep growing while helping ensure prosperity for future generations and preserve the environment. Well, Desjardins has always been a socioeconomic leader, helping entrepreneurs adapt to new realities. And when it comes to circular economy, what we realized was that they were not quite sure where and how to start. So while conferences are a good place to get ideas, probably not sufficient. So we realized we needed to kickstart the circular economy engine with circular innovation labs, which goal is to find and test concrete solutions to accelerate the shift to circular economy. So the investment that you referred to, Elizabeth, is an investment with the Center for Intersectoral Studies and Research in Circular Economies, the CELC, from the École de Technologie Supérieure in Montreal. It's a 2.1 million contribution over 5 years to support the network of circular economy lab. And that network will help initiate and catalyze transition of key sectors towards the circular economy. We are in particular supporting the construction lab. It was launched in August 2021. Why? Well, it was already mentioned, construction is a priority sector for circular economy. In Quebec, for example, it's about 8% of GDP. It's 1.8 gigatons of waste per year, and waste that ends up in landfills or in waste incineration. So the aim is to increase resource productivity at all stages of the cycle life in construction sector, with ideally concrete impact for more circular practices. Well, and so to conclude on your question on the business case of this investment, let me cite the 2021 Circular Economies report requested by Recyc Quebec, which concluded that Quebec economy is only 3.5 circular. So on the reverse side, if you look at it, on the flip side, there is in Quebec a circularity gap of over 96%. Mm-hmm. And at Desjardins, we see that gap as a great potential return for investment, yes, in circular economy, but more importantly, a huge opportunity for business members and our community.
You bet. Thanks, Gildas. And some of the comments in the chat, even while you were speaking, were about the need to start small with, smaller projects, smaller opportunities, pilot scale, so that we can scale those up. So some really positive comments about the hands-on approach that Desjardins is taking. I want to take a minute to invite Michelle Bonner from Van City to join on screen now and pose a final question before Gildas. We ask you to take a quick break, but don't go far because we're going to invite you back. So Michelle, over to you.
Hi, Gildas. Thanks for your remarks just now. My question for you is, in your view, how might we leverage net zero commitments and targets to advance the circular economy?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michelle. Companies that are serious about reaching their net zero commitments know that you need circular economy in the equation. I don't think there is another way around. Like mentioned by previously, climate change is for large part the result of our linear economy and our unsustainable consumption patterns. So let me mention the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which states that energy usage represents 55% of global GHG emissions. By energy usage, they mean energy used for electricity generation, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system in buildings, and for transportation. So what is the remaining 45% of emissions made of? Well, it is made of materials and products, including the food system. So if you have a net zero commitment, well, circular economy is required to tackle the emissions embedded in those materials and products, a category which is otherwise quite challenging to tackle. So I would say that, there are other reports out there that, support the linkage between climate change and GHG reduction by circular economy. And in the transport sector, for example, let's just take this as an example. It's a key sector for greenhouse gas emission. And yes, we mentioned that electrifying transport can solve part of the problem because it decarbonizes the transportation on the usage basis, but it's not sufficient. Why? And it was already mentioned by Jan on the previous panel, you have all the material used. So transitioning to a circular system in transportation could reduce emission. For example, you need to work on the making electric vehicles lighter, more durable. You have options in sharing vehicles, even though there are some challenges raised already, but also designing vehicles for reuse and remanufacturing. Remanufacturing and reusing an engine, it's up to 85% less carbon intensive than making a new one. So, conclusion, serious net zero commitments, like the one made by Desjardins, to be achieved, clearly require a strategy to move towards circular economy.
Thank you so much, Gildas. We'll invite you to take a break. Don't go too far because we'll invite you back. And I do want to encourage folks, please be putting your questions for our speakers into the chat because we will bring everybody back for some Q&A. But in the meantime, Michelle, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I'm keen to dig into the line of questioning with you because we did in the previous panel have a number of questions and observations about how to support small and medium-sized businesses. And of course, for Vancity, that's a keen interest. You're investing in small businesses and entrepreneurs that are bringing circular business models and innovation to the forefront. What challenges are you seeing developing products and services sort of specifically to support that group?
Thanks, Elizabeth, for the chance to be here. I'll start with a broader challenge. As in other parts of the world, the circular economy is still at an early emergent stage in our region, which is southwestern British Columbia. And so we need more circular businesses to create products and services for. Vancity is trying to get at this challenge by supporting initiatives like the Synergy Foundation's Project Zero Incubator, which is a program focused on helping circular businesses to launch. And just as an aside, just a quick explanation that we're able to do this because Vancity, which is a cooperative financial institution, returns 30% of our profits to our members and communities, and half of that in the form of grants and partnerships that help to advance our transition to a low carbon resilient economy that doesn't leave anyone behind. So we're able to bring this community investment as well as our banking products and services to support a circular economy. Another way we're supporting the emergence of a circular economy in our region is through our partnership with the Vancouver Economic Commission and the Share, Reuse, Repair initiative, who some folks may have heard from already in the conference, to convene a series of online events this fall to bring the circular business community in our region together and to foster a peer network that can learn from and support each other. And I think that echoes some of the comments earlier. Getting to kind of a more concrete challenges, community investments in initiatives like this also help bring circular financing opportunities to Vancity. And in addition to conventional lending, we have a microfinance program that looks beyond a borrower's credit history and carefully considers the business model and plan, as well as the entrepreneur's character and experience. And I wanted to share a couple of challenges that our lenders have observed when working with circular businesses. And that's, circular products and services can sometimes, not always, of course, but sometimes be more expensive to deliver than a conventional competitor's. And that extra overhead can make it harder for a startup to get through those early years. A circular value chain can sometimes also can make it more complicated to expand geographically to set up that same kind of value chain in other areas. And an unproven business model can present a higher financial risk to the lender. And this echoes Jonathan a little bit, I think, here. So these challenges really point to the need for circular businesses to present solid business plans that address those potential risks. Which brings me to a final challenge, and which is we at Vancity, and I would say, the wider community of financial institutions, at least in our region, we still have work to do to build our understanding of circular models and what circular businesses need from us. We also need to think about how our risk frameworks might need to shift and better account for the strengths of circular business models. For example, a circular business might have greater capital expenses up front, but reduced operating costs and reduced value chain risk over time. So there's an opportunity here, I think, for FIs, at least locally, to share knowledge and experience and to develop new frameworks together.
That's great, Michelle. I want to dig into a little bit more how, what can small businesses do on the flip side to, to better position themselves? You mentioned one piece of advice around solid business plans, especially for untested business models. Any other advice for small businesses based on your experience at Van City of what those businesses can do to better position themselves to receive support from FIs?
Mm-hmm. As you said, this in some ways is the other side of the coin to the challenges I just mentioned, and really encouraging small circular businesses, just like any small business, work to understand and come to a financial institution with the key things, the basic things that a lender is going to look for, which is, an entrepreneurial champion that knows the business and is committed to it, a credible business plan with supportable cash flow projections that will allow them to service their debt, and the ability to secure the loan. And I saw some chat earlier that can certainly be tricky for entrepreneurs, but it's a hurdle that needs to be overcome. And incubators like Project Zero and other startup incubators can be a huge help here. And in addition to those pieces, businesses should be prepared to communicate about the environmental and social impact of the circular models and how that impact ideally aligns with sustainability related goals the financial institution has. And, just to refer to Gildas's comments around linking it to net zero where possible and having the right metrics to track over time and demonstrate that impact.
You bet.
And then,
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's okay. Finally, I might just say, encourage small businesses could challenge their lenders a little bit and ask them for support to meet their sustainability goals by rewarding or incentivizing circular models. And for example, to help Van City move toward our own net zero climate goal, we have a suite of loans to businesses and retail members with preferred rates for building retrofits, low carbon fleet conversion, and other measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I wonder if there could be something similar, more targeted at circular businesses that are disrupting the linear model.
We did see in our opening poll that heavy weight on that opportunity for financial institutions, to dig into what are those innovative products and offerings and to work with businesses to co-create them. Thanks, Michelle, for being part of the rapid fire component of the session. So it's my pleasure now to invite all our speakers to turn their cameras back on and rejoin. So I'll invite Jonathan, Michaela, and Gildas to pop your cameras back on and join me on screen. So we can take some questions from the audience. And I wanted to start with one that came through and is very connected to that. So there's that opportunity around how do we leverage net zero or climate to really move forward in circular economy. But a great question about how do we make sure investments in circular economy don't have unintended consequences and might inadvertently actually increase climate and biodiversity impacts. And so I wondered if any of you have thoughts on that. Are there challenges with or potential pitfalls, potential unintended consequences when we look at circular investments, circular economy that might, that we need to avoid those pitfalls of potential unintended consequences. And the example was one in the forest industry, where we're seeing some increased activity in forestry that might, as a result of, increased pressure on high carbon value forests to provide paper packaging fiber was the example. So I'll just open it up and see if any of you have thoughts on it. It's a tough one, and I'd love folks to be sharing in the chat if they have observations. Anybody want to tackle this one? Gildas, yeah.
Yes, well, I think, first of all, I think that there need to be some references to strong methodologies. And I think life cycle assessment to me is really an anchoring point to make sure that you are not selecting a solution and you are blindsided by not looking at the overall value chain. So that life cycle assessment is quite rigorous today from an environmental perspective to be able to understand the full life cycle and impact, but also sometimes understand more complex situation like consequences of a choice versus another. So comparative analysis. So I would say it could be demanding tool, but from in the back of your mind, I think it's always important to keep such references to make a better choice and avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah, comes back a little bit to some of Michelle's comments around business plan and really, doing that, having all that information that investors might look for. Any other comments on this one? Or yeah, Jonathan, please.
Yeah, I would just add, and I think it ties in very much with what Michelle was saying, that part of why I think having clear contracts around your inputs is important is it then also makes sure that you're not creating something that relies on a damaging to the environment process and the byproducts thereof, right? You need to know where you're going to get your inputs from and whether those inputs existing is a byproduct of a temporary economic situation or a process that we need in the longer term that somebody can stand behind and say, yes, I will be able to supply you waste pulp because we're going to do timber from carbon sequestration, rather than saying, you know what, I can grow a forest, throw it into a biomass plant and, make money doing that. Maybe that's something I should do.
Yeah, great point. I wanted to come back to another question that was raised, and Michelle, that you referenced, that some circular economy models, companies, products face some higher upfront business costs, and that can be challenging. Any advice, whether from the debt or the equity side, on what can financial institutions do to help overcome some of those upfront costs, and what can businesses be doing to help overcome some of those upfront cost challenges? Anybody want to tackle that one? And is this unique to circular economy, or is this a sort of a universal startup challenge?
I'm happy to jump in, Elizabeth. I think from our perspective, capital allocation is definitely one of the key topics of conversation when we look towards the intentionality of a business in moving forward with not just circularity and the movement towards a circular economy, but across the host of E, S, and G conversations that we have with business. So I would say from our perspective, and in terms of actually having that discourse with more mature companies, that would of course look different than what that would look like with entrepreneurs and more early stage ventures. But I think that that's a necessary piece in terms of thinking about long-term sustainable value creation. We have to invest for the long term. And I do think it's important that equity investors are considering that in the discourse around sustainability.
Great, thank you. There was a comment in the earlier panel as well about, and each of the panelists shared a few views on the need to sort of reimagine growth. And I think this is a note that comes up in the climate and net zero and resiliency space, as well as, very relevant to the circular economy opportunity. What does that look like as investors, where you have a commitment to earn a return? What does that reimagining of growth mean? There was a suggestion of whether GDP, for example, at a more macro level, is the right metric we want to move forward as we think about measuring growth. Can you comment on what that, as we think about more sustainable, more efficient, more circular business models, what does it mean for a financial institution to reimagine growth? Michelle, you want to kick off, and then Jonathan, I'll go to you next.
I might just acknowledge that I think this is a tricky area and a new area as we start really looking at net zero and investing in circular economy. And I think it might have been Jean-Luc in the previous panel that talked about his ability to grow as a company while he's using he's recycling and he's not pulling new materials into the system. And so where we can think about investing and supporting those businesses where we're allowing them to grow financially, that's a place. And when I think of Vancity's commitment around net zero and also our desire to support businesses that will support that, let's say retrofit of buildings that will support that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, I think that's a type of growth that we can pursue.
Yeah, awesome. Jonathan.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll take a challenging position on this, which is I think the issue is not growth versus degrowth. I think it's a question of measuring properly the full externalities, or what we call externalities, but our costs, and including those in the equation. If we can, when measuring in natural capital contributions, environmental costs, all of those inputs get growth, you're creating prosperity. And like 200 years of BMO's path has been lending people money to grow. You just potentially for some of that time, not always measuring those for full externalities. In the context of that, I don't think growth is a bad word. If we can include all those costs and we can help companies grow, circular economy companies are just measuring more of that because they're very much conscious of it. And growth itself isn't necessarily a hindrance, especially if you need capital, because nobody does have a mandate for, slow decline of capital, I would say.
I love when people take potentially controversial positions. That's magic to the virtual stage. So thanks, Jonathan. Gildas, you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, I would say that, you see many organizations today that try to reinvigorate their purpose, their mission. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you have two co-ops today on the panel. There is a cooperative mindset and making sure that those organizations that have a clear purpose will take a different look at growth and really what really the target for our societies. So I would say that having clearly the right engine and the right systemic structure could be a solution to a different kind of growth.
Excellent. I was so excited to get everybody on screen together that I was remiss in. I know, Jonathan, I was meant in my fun format to have you ask a question of Michelle, and I just got so excited to have everyone on screen together. I skipped right over that. So I wanted to give you, Jonathan, an opportunity to pose a follow-up question to Michelle in the spirit of our expert to expert dialogue. Yeah.
So maybe Michelle, I'll go back to in terms of the investments you're making in circular business strategies and the operations of those kinds of companies, what kinds of social, environmental, and economic impacts are you seeing in the communities that you're making those investments in?
Thanks, Jonathan. Elizabeth, I thought maybe you were just worried about time. So I'll kind of illustrate with a few examples. So, some of the businesses that we've invested in and supported in different ways are helping to create really whole new economic sectors. And one is Unbuilders, which deconstructs homes and rescues the valuable old lumber and other materials inside them. And Unbuilders has partnered with Habitat for Humanity to create the Rebuild Hub, which provides a market for those materials from deconstruction to find new buyers. And together, they're helping develop the infrastructure that's needed to support stronger policy around deconstruction, which will in turn help to grow that sector. So there's some, I want to make a joke about circularity within circularity, but that's an exciting example. Circular businesses are creating new green jobs and skills that will be needed in a low carbon resilient economy. And a related project is the Share, Reuse, Repair initiatives Just Circular Recovery and Transition Project, which is bringing circular innovators together with organizations working with marginalized communities to identify opportunities for employment there. And finally, we see circular businesses as socializing circular models with consumers, so educating and enabling them to make sustainable choices. For example, the businesses that are enabling restaurants and cafes to offer reusable takeout containers are also helping consumers to shift their expectations and be more accepting of moving away from single use. So they're really opening up the conversation about lighter living more generally and making room for a broader behavior change. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Fantastic. No, thanks, Michelle. And no, thanks for your patience. And I wanted to come back to that opportunity for Jonathan to interact with you. So we're getting close to the end. Thank you to all of our audience members and to our speakers for hanging out with us for a couple of hours here. What I do want to make sure we have time for at the close here is I want to just invite each of our speakers to share in your mind what's been the most important takeaway that you've heard today. And that might have come from the first hour panel. It might have come from some of the things we've seen shared in the chat. And that might be, you know, an aha moment for you, a really critical action that we really should move forward with urgently if we want to see circular finance opportunities scaled up. So I want to do a bit of a rapid fire, kind of 30 seconds, no more than 1 minute each. Just share your perspectives on that. And Gildas, if I could, maybe I'll start with you to share that. What's that most important takeaway you got from today? 15 to 30 seconds.
Yes, from a financial perspective, I think the idea of how to de-risk the circular economy model is a key takeaway from me. And I will gladly look at the report that was proposed in the chat by Jan, and hopefully find some good nuggets there to de-risk in our portfolio as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Gildas. Michaela, could I go to you next?
Yes, sure. I think just given where I am at in terms of how we invest in NEI, it's been really interesting to hear Michelle speak about her experiences working with smaller, growing, emerging businesses. I think that has provided some really helpful insights into how we can think more at a more fulsome level about really what collaboration and integration of circularity means for each and all of us in this move towards a circular economy.
Fantastic. By way of a segue, because Canadians love a good segue. Michelle, I'll go to you next.
Thanks. I think, well, Gildas, really echo you. And then also the opportunity and need to share ideas and learn from each other, both at the small business level. And, you know, Gildas, you referenced this, and I think Vancity does this too, but really trying to create case studies, examples that the businesses can look to, and then an opportunity to really learn from each other in the financial industry and understand what each other are doing, and you know, and leverage that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. And Jonathan, final word to you.
Yeah, I'll echo back to something Jean-Luc mentioned in the first panel, which is around partnerships. And I think as I was running through in our discussion, the set of ways that you can de-risk things, I was probably remiss in not including the concept of partnerships more formally, you know, whether it's with customers, whether it's with suppliers, integrating, and I think sometimes sharing that risk and the rewards with the partners that you're going to have in your business. And obviously, as we're doing this panel with other actors in the financial community, I think there's a great lesson in that, and an opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, let me thank you all again for joining on screen together, engaging in this rapid fire, a little bit of an experiment interview format. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you around the Circular Economy Forum, I hope, future sessions. Thanks so much, speakers. To my audience, we've reached the final minutes of our session. So thanks for being here. Before we wrap things up, I do want to invite my colleagues Peggy and Paul to rejoin me on screen here, our co-hosts, my co-hosts, co-partners in delivering today's session. And thanks to you both very much for being a part of putting this together. Paul for leading that fun exercise for our break, and Peggy for moderating and pulling together a great panel this morning. Before we wrap things up, I also want to invite participants one more time to share some thoughts with us. So you're going to very soon, right now, see a closing poll appearing on your screen. If we could share that poll now. What we want you to think about is, you know, based on all the great insights that you've heard today, can you share your thoughts on what you think is going to be the most important next step to scale up circular finance? So if my Globe Series tech support in the back end could share that poll now, that would be fantastic. looks like we might be having a bit of a challenge with the poll. So I would love if you would share in the chat. Forget the poll. Who needs the poll? Share in the chat what you think is the most important next step. Is it, linking circular economy transition to that broader environmental or net zero agenda? Thanks, Paul. Some options for you to choose from there. Is it enhancing policy and regulation? Is it building awareness and capacity? Better standardization of data definition? So please do share in the chat what you think is important. And agreed, writing checks important, maybe beyond funding, where we know is a critical role for the finance sector. What is that important role? And please do be sharing that in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Peggy and Paul, see some responses coming in terms of that awareness building and capacity for sure. I loved hearing about some of those pilots and incubator opportunities happening in Quebec and BC. What about for you two? What were some of what was your favorite thing you heard, Peggy, today? 30 seconds, rapid fire.
I think my favorite is really increasing collaboration and partnership. I think it's absolutely key to better collaborate, to understand the value chains, and to better partner within a same value chain. Yes. To identify opportunities and better partner between financial institutions and enterprises, between public sector, private sector. I think that is really key.
Awesome. Paul, how about you? 15 seconds or less. What was the best thing you heard?
Yeah, I really like the concrete examples, the Desjardins, Vancity, and some of the others shared. I think, why don't we have circular incubators in every province across Canada, and why, aren't we engaging the chambers of commerce across the country? So opportunities to kind of replicate and scale existing models and start to prove out the value-driven opportunities. Awesome. So I'd say that, let's just be doing more of this and engaging people. And I think, we have to pretty much do all of what's in that list, A through E.
You bet.
At some point. So
awesome. Well, thanks both of you. So we have reached the end of our time together. I want to once again thank all of our esteemed speakers that joined today. I want to thank my colleagues and partners in delivering the session, Peggy and the UNEP FI team, Paul and the CELC team, the Globe team who worked so hard to bring this session to life. Thank you to the WCEF 2021 event hosts, Environment Climate Change Canada and Citra, for making this possible. And finally, of course, thank you to all of you for attending. We will make a recording of this session available. We'll also be preparing a brief what we heard document, so keep an eye on your inboxes for that. Until then, stay safe, stay positive, stay hopeful, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.